So picture this, a ceasefire gets announced between two major world powers. The world kind of collectively breathes a sigh of relief, right? But then, instead of peace, that single announcement unleashes even more violence and a total storm of global confusion. Well, that's not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened in the high-stakes drama between the US and Iran.
It all kicked off on April 8th with this post from Pakistan's Prime Minister. And notice, it's in all caps, declaring that a huge ceasefire deal had been struck, and it specifically, explicitly included Lebanon. On the surface, this looked like a massive win for diplomacy.
But here's the kicker. Minutes, literally minutes after this message of peace hit the internet, the reality on the ground told a completely different and frankly terrifying story. Israel unleashed a massive barrage of over 100 missiles into Lebanon. So peace is announced, and the immediate response is war.
And then, just to make things even more confusing, came the official denial. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just flat out contradicted the whole thing. He made it crystal clear that from their perspective, the conflict was nowhere near over. So what on earth was going on?
Okay, to get our heads around this absolute mess, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at exactly how that ceasefire just fell to pieces. Then, we're going to try to untangle the blame game. We'll peek behind the curtain at some secret talks that were happening. We'll try to figure out who really won and who lost here. And finally, we'll look at the real human cost of all this.
So first up, let's just reconstruct that wild 24-hour period where this promise of peace completely disintegrated into open warfare.
I mean, the timeline here is just dizzying, right? You get an afternoon announcement of peace, which is immediately followed by an evening of intense missile strikes. Then you get a late-night denial from a key U.S. ally, and by the very next day, Iran had responded by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz again. It was just a complete and dangerous mess.
So, the billion-dollar question is, how could something this important go so spectacularly wrong? Almost immediately, the finger-pointing started, and two very, very different stories began to emerge.
And this is the question that had diplomats and analysts just scrambling. Was this a massive, catastrophic misunderstanding, or was this a deliberate act of deception? And honestly, the answer really depends on which side of the story you believe. Okay, so you basically have two competing theories here. In one corner, theory A, is the idea that the US was the real architect of this chaos. A New York Times report even claimed the White House itself drafted the tweet for Pakistan's PM, only to completely backpedal after Israel attacked. But in the other corner, you have theory B. This theory pins the blame squarely on Pakistan, suggesting they misrepresented the deal to both sides in a desperate rush to claim a huge diplomatic victory. Some critics even dubbed this the Punjabi way of negotiations, pointing to a history of, let's call it, overly ambitious deal-making.
But here's a thought. What if this whole public relations disaster was actually just a smokescreen for the real main event? Something happening far away from the cameras, in Islamabad.
Yep, while the world was reeling from the ceasefire confusion, very high-level American and Iranian delegations were quietly gathering in Pakistan for these incredibly critical, indirect negotiations. The goal? To finally put an end to this 41-day conflict.
Now, the setup for these talks, it tells you everything you need to know about the level of trust here, which is to say, there was none. These were not face-to-face meetings. You had the U.S. delegation, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, in one room, and the Iranian delegation, led by Speaker Ghalibaf, in a completely separate room. And you had Pakistani officials literally running messages back and forth between them. It's a method they call proxy talks, and it's a very clear sign of just how deep the distrust runs.
And this right here, this shows you just how massive the gap was between them. They weren't just on different pages. They were in different libraries. The U.S. came in with one single core demand. Iran gives up all of its enriched uranium. Full stop. Iran, on the other hand, showed up with this comprehensive 10-point plan demanding everything from a full U.S. military withdrawal from the entire region to having oversight of the Strait of Hormuz. The gulf between them was just immense.
So after 41 days of fighting, a fake ceasefire, and these secret talks, who actually won? Well, to answer that, we first kind of have to agree on what victory even means in a conflict like this.
Yeah, it's really crucial to get this distinction. A tactical victory is all about winning the battles, right? You destroy a target, you take some ground. But a strategic victory, that's about winning the war. It's about achieving your bigger long-term political goals and ending up in a better spot than when you started. So if we use that framework, you can actually make a pretty compelling case that both sides walked away with a type of victory. The U.S., you could say, scored a tactical win. They inflicted some serious damage, and they did force Iran to the negotiating table. But Iran Arguably, they achieved a strategic victory. The regime didn't collapse under the pressure of a superpower, they proved they could fight back, and, more importantly, that they could disrupt the entire global economy by controlling the Strait of Hormuz. They survived. And that survival itself was a victory that let them walk into those talks with that strong 10-point plan.
But here's the thing. If both Washington and Tehran can find a way to spin this as some kind of win, there is one group that absolutely, undeniably lost. And their story often gets buried under all the headlines about military strikes and high-level diplomacy.
At least 1,880. That's the number of civilians who were killed in Lebanon, just caught in a crossfire. They paid the ultimate price for a war that wasn't even theirs.
And this is where the story becomes truly surreal. At the same time that bodies were being counted in Lebanon, the media in Pakistan was in full celebration mode, even calling for a Nobel Peace Prize for the Prime Minister for his role in the so-called peace deal.
It really shows that Pakistan proved to be a master of the information war. The narrative they pushed was this heroic tale of saving the world from World War III. The reality? The mediation was completely bungled, it created more chaos, and, far from being seen as a peacemaker, the whole debacle ended up turning public opinion in Iran squarely against them.
And all of this just leaves us with a pretty sobering final question. When powerful nations can craft their own versions of reality, when they can declare victory even in the face of tragedy, who is it that always ends up paying the real price for the truth?